My son Daniel stood in my kitchen on my 50th birthday, wearing a suit that cost more than I made in a month, and delivered the words that would haunt both of us for years to come. "You want to know the truth, Dad? You were never a real father. You were just a guy who worked all the time and happened to live in the same house as me." 25 years. 25 years of 60-hour work weeks, of choosing between groceries and his baseball cleats, of falling asleep at my kitchen table over his homework while he slept safely in his bed. 25 years of every decision I made revolving around giving him opportunities one never had. And on my 50th birthday, he reduced it all to that single devastating sentence. But what happened next, what I showed him from the wooden box I'd been saving for 25 years, didn't just break him. It shattered his entire understanding of what kind of man his father really was. Welcome to Family Reckoning. I'm sharing this story today because sometimes the people we sacrifice everything for can't see the sacrifice until it's too late to take back the words that cut deepest. Drop your city or country in the comments below so I know where my family is watching from. Also, please note this video contains fictionalized elements for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or places is purely coincidental, but the message about sacrifice and recognition is painfully real. The sound of a factory whistle at 4:30 a.m. is something that gets into your bones when you've been hearing it for 25 years. It cuts through whatever dreams you might have been having and pulls you back to reality. Another day, another shift, another $8 an hour plus overtime if you're lucky. I started working at Meridian Steel the week after Daniel's mother walked out on us. He was 18 months old, barely talking, still in diapers. Sarah left on a Tuesday morning while he was having breakfast, setting his sippy cup on the high chair and telling me she couldn't do this anymore. This was being a mother. This was the small apartment we shared. This was the life we'd built together that had become, in her words, suffocating and ordinary. She packed 2 suitcases, kissed Daniel on the forehead, and told me she was moving to California with a man she'd met at her part-time job. She said she'd send for Daniel when she got settled. 25 years later, we're still waiting for that call. So it was just Daniel and me in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Cleveland. Me working rotating shifts at the steel plant while trying to figure out how to be a father to a toddler who kept asking where mommy went. The childcare situation was a nightmare. Daycare cost more than my rent. Babysitters were unreliable and expensive. My mother lived 4 hours away and had her own health problems. For the first 6 months, I was constantly scrambling, begging neighbors to watch Daniel during my shifts, missing work when childcare fell through, always one crisis away from losing my job. That's when I met Mrs. Rodriguez. Elena Rodriguez lived in the apartment downstairs with her 3 children. She was a widow, working nights as a hospital cleaner, trying to make ends meet on her own. She understood the mathematics of single parenthood, the brutal arithmetic of choosing between rent and groceries, between work and being present for your child. "Me, Joe," she said to me one evening when I was pacing the hallway with Daniel, both of us exhausted and frustrated. "Bring him downstairs. My youngest is already asleep. He can sleep on my couch until you get home from work." Mrs. Rodriguez became Daniel's unofficial grandmother. She watched him during my night shifts, fed him dinner when I had to work late, taught him Spanish while I was learning to balance factory work with single fatherhood. She never asked for payment. She said helping each other was what families did, and we were family now. "Your papa works very hard for you," she would tell Daniel in her careful English. "He loves you more than anything in this world." She was right about that. Every decision I made for the next 25 years started with one question: what does Daniel need? What Daniel needed was stability, so I stayed at Meridian Steel even when other opportunities came up, because steady employment with benefits was more important than career advancement. What Daniel needed was a good school district, so I saved for 2 years to move us to a better neighborhood, even though it meant I had to take on weekend shifts to afford the higher rent. What Daniel needed was someone to help with homework, so I taught myself algebra and chemistry and biology, sitting at our kitchen table night after night, learning alongside him because I couldn't afford a tutor. What Daniel needed was to play sports, so I worked double shifts to pay for equipment and registration fees, then rearranged my work schedule around his games and practices. Every choice had a cost. Every opportunity for Daniel meant a sacrifice somewhere else. When he was 8 and wanted to play Little League, I picked up a part-time job at a warehouse loading trucks from midnight to 6 a.m., then went straight to my regular shift at the plant. I was working 16-hour days so he could afford the glove, the cleats, the registration fee. When he was 12 and needed a better computer for school, I sold my car and took the bus to work for 6 months to buy him a decent laptop. When he was 16 and wanted to go on the school trip to Washington, D.C., I worked every available overtime shift for 3 months, including Thanksgiving and Christmas, to pay the $800 fee. Daniel never knew about most of these sacrifices. That was intentional. I didn't want him to feel guilty about the opportunities one was giving him. I wanted him to focus on school, on sports, on building the kind of future I'd never had the chance to build. But I kept records. Every sacrifice, every extra shift, every dollar spent on his future instead of my own. I wrote it all down in a composition notebook I kept in a wooden box under my bed. Not because I planned to use it against him someday, but because I wanted to remember. I wanted to document the love, even if he couldn't see it while it was happening. Daniel was brilliant. Not just smart, brilliant. He excelled in everything he touched. Honor roll every semester, varsity baseball, student council president. He had the kind of natural intelligence and charisma that made teachers remember him years after graduation. But more than that, he was driven. He understood that education was his ticket to a different kind of life, and he pursued it with the focus of someone who'd watched his father's back break over manual labor for 18 years. He earned a full academic scholarship to Case Western Reserve University, studying business administration with plans to work in corporate finance. I was incredibly proud, the first person in our family to go to college, building the kind of career I dreamed about but never had the opportunity to pursue. But college changed him in ways I hadn't expected. He came home for Thanksgiving his sophomore year using words I had to look up, talking about internships at investment firms that paid more in 3 months than I made in a year. He'd started wearing clothes that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, speaking with an accent that sounded like he was trying to erase any trace of working-class Cleveland from his voice. "Dad, you should really think about going back to school," he told me during that visit, sitting in our small living room with his laptop open to community college websites. "Get some kind of certification, maybe move into management at the plant. You're too smart to be doing manual labor forever." He meant well, but what he was really saying was that my work, the work that had paid for his entire childhood, wasn't respectable enough for the person he was becoming. "I appreciate the thought, Danny," I said, "but I like what I do. I'm good at it, and it's given you opportunities one never had. Dad, you don't need to sacrifice your potential for me anymore. I'm an adult. You should focus on building something for yourself." My potential, as though 25 years of skilled industrial work had been some kind of holding pattern until I could become something better. After graduation, Daniel landed a job at a prestigious consulting firm downtown. Within 2 years, he was making more money than I'd earned in my best year at the plant. He moved into a high-rise apartment in downtown Cleveland and started socializing with people who, in his words, understood the importance of professional networking and personal development. Our relationship became a series of obligatory monthly dinners at restaurants Daniel would choose, never anywhere too expensive because he didn't want to seem flashy, but never anywhere too casual because he didn't want to be seen somewhere beneath his status. He'd update me on his career advancement, his new social circle, his dating life with women who worked at law firms and marketing agencies. But he never asked about my work anymore. He'd nod politely when I'd mention something interesting that had happened at the plant, a challenging repair job, a process improvement I'd suggested, new safety protocols I was helping implement. "That's great, Dad," he'd say with the tone of someone humoring a person whose life was too small to warrant genuine interest. The real change came when he met Jennifer. Jennifer Martinez came from what she called an educated family. Her father was a doctor. Her mother was a college professor. She was brilliant, ambitious, and possessed the particular kind of confidence that comes from growing up in a household where intellectual achievement was the primary measure of worth. Daniel was completely captivated by her world. Within 6 months of dating her, he'd begun adapting his speech patterns, his interests, even his opinions to match what he perceived as her family's expectations. "Jennifer's father thinks I have real potential in consulting," he told me during one of our increasingly strained dinners. "He's been mentoring me about strategic thinking and market analysis. He says the manufacturing sector is becoming obsolete, that the real opportunities are in knowledge work and innovation." The manufacturing sector. That was how he'd begun referring to my 25 years of skilled labor, not as honest work that had built his opportunities, but as part of a dying industry that smart people were moving away from. "Danny," I said carefully, "manufacturing isn't going anywhere. Someone has to build the things that make the world work." Of course, Dad. I'm not criticizing what you do. I'm just saying that for someone with my education and abilities, there are better opportunities in the service sector. Better opportunities. He'd learned to speak about his career choices in ways that implicitly diminished everything I'd done to make those choices possible. By his third year at the consulting firm, Daniel had effectively erased my existence from his professional life. When Jennifer's family hosted dinners or social events, he would attend alone, explaining my absence as a scheduling conflict rather than admitting he was ashamed of his blue-collar father. I found this out by accident when I ran into one of his college friends at a grocery store. "Hey, Mr. Patterson. I was just talking to Jenny last week about Daniel. She mentioned she's never met his family. You guys must be super busy with work." Huh, never met his family. After 3 years of dating, Daniel had never introduced me to the woman he was planning to marry. That night I called him. "Danny, I think it's time I met Jennifer." A long pause. Then, "Dad, it's complicated. Jennifer's family moves in very specific social circles. They're academics, professionals. Their dinner conversations tend to focus on topics that might not be relevant to your experience. Topics that might not be relevant to my experience." Translation. I wasn't educated enough, articulate enough, or respectable enough to sit at their table without embarrassing him. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I raised you better than this." "Better than what?" "Dad, I'm not ashamed of you. I'm just being realistic about social dynamics. When I marry Jennifer, I'll be joining a family with certain expectations. I need to be strategic about how I navigate those relationships." Strategic. My son was strategically managing my access to his life to ensure I didn't damage his social positioning. We didn't speak for 4 months after that conversation. During those 4 months, something inside me shifted. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. I realized that Daniel had made a choice about what kind of man he wanted to be, and that choice didn't include respect for the man who'd raised him. But I also realized something else. In all those years of working multiple jobs and making sacrifices, I'd never told Daniel the full story of what I'd given up for him. I'd protected him from the weight of my choices, but maybe that protection had been a mistake. Maybe it was time he understood exactly what kind of father I'd actually been. Daniel called me in early March to say he wanted to take me out for my 50th birthday. It was the first contact we'd had since our argument about Jennifer, and I was hopeful that maybe we could rebuild our relationship. "Just the two of us, Dad," he said over the phone. "Dinner at Romano's, then back to your place for cake. Like old times." Romano's was a mid-level Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated my birthdays when he was in high school. It wasn't fancy, but it wasn't embarrassing either, neutral territory that wouldn't challenge his new social sensibilities. The dinner went well enough. Daniel talked about work, his promotion to senior consultant, his plans to propose to Jennifer over the summer. He was animated, confident, clearly thriving in his professional life. I was proud of his success, even as I felt the growing distance between us. After dinner, we drove back to my apartment. I'd baked a simple chocolate cake, nothing elaborate. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd helped him with homework for 12 years, where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, where he'd told me about his dreams and fears throughout his childhood. "Dad," he said as I cut the cake, "I've been thinking about our conversation last year, about Jennifer meeting the family." "Oh," I set a slice in front of him, the same way I'd done with birthday cake every year since he was 2 years old. "I think maybe it's time. Maybe we could have dinner next month, something casual. But Dad, I need you to understand that Jennifer's family they're very intellectual. They talk about books, current events, philosophy. They value articulate conversation and broad knowledge." I sat down across from him with my own slice of cake. "And you think I can't handle that kind of conversation?" "It's not that you can't handle it. It's that you haven't had the same educational opportunities. They discuss things you might not be familiar with: literature, economic theory, political analysis. I don't want you to feel out of place." "I see. So you'd like me to what exactly?" "Pretend to be someone I'm not. I'd like you to be aware of the context. Maybe brush up on some current events. Think about how to present your work experience in a way that emphasizes the technical skills rather than the manual labor aspects. Present my work experience." He wanted me to rebrand 25 years of honest labor into something that wouldn't embarrass him in front of his girlfriend's educated family. "Daniel," I said quietly, "do you think I'm stupid?" The question caught him off guard. What? No, of course not. Dad, you're intelligent. You haven't had the same opportunities for formal education and professional development. Do you think I'm a good father? Another pause, longer this time. Dad, why are you asking these questions? Because I'm trying to understand something. I'm trying to understand how the son I raised for 25 years, the son I worked 60-hour weeks to support, the son I gave up every personal dream to provide for, has come to see me as someone who needs to be managed and hidden. Daniel's face flushed. Dad, that's not fair. I'm not hiding you. I'm just trying to help you understand that different social situations require different approaches. Different approaches. I see. I stood up from the table and walked to my bedroom. From under the bed, I pulled out the wooden box I'd been keeping for 25 years. It was heavy, filled with 25 years of documentation, sacrifice, and love that Daniel had never seen. I carried it back to the kitchen and set it on the table between us. What's that? Daniel asked. That, I said, is the answer to your question about what kind of father I've been. But instead of opening it, I looked at my son. This successful, articulate young man who thought I needed coaching to be presentable to his girlfriend's family, and I felt something break inside me. You know what, Danny? Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not educated enough for your new social circle. Maybe 25 years of working multiple jobs to pay for your opportunities wasn't the kind of fathering that counts in your world. Dad, please, you're taking this the wrong way. Am I? Because what I'm hearing is that my son, the son I've loved more than anything in this world, thinks I'm an embarrassment. What I'm hearing is that everything I sacrificed to give you a better life has somehow made me unworthy of respect in return. Daniel's composure cracked slightly. Dad, you're being dramatic. I never said you were an embarrassment. You didn't have to say it, Danny. You've been showing it for 3 years. The way you avoid introducing me to your friends. The way you change the subject when I talk about my work. The way you've decided that I need to be managed, to be acceptable to the people you want to impress. I sat back down at the table, my hands resting on the wooden box. So let me ask you again, son. Do you think I was a good father? Daniel looked uncomfortable, trapped between his desire to avoid hurting me and his inability to give me the answer I was looking for. Dad, you did the best you could with the circumstances you had. You worked hard. You provided for me. But you were never really present. You were always working, always tired, always focused on paying the bills instead of being a real father. There it was, the devastating truth about how my son saw 25 years of sacrifice. You were never a real father, he continued, his voice gaining strength as he convinced himself of his own narrative. You were just a guy who worked all the time and happened to live in the same house as me. Real fathers are present. They're involved. They teach you things beyond just how to work hard and pay bills. The words hit me like a physical blow, not just because they were cruel, but because I could see that Daniel actually believed them. In his mind, my absence during work hours had negated every sacrifice I'd made. My exhaustion from working multiple jobs had been interpreted as disengagement rather than dedication. I looked at this young man I'd loved more than my own life, and I realized he had no idea what kind of father I'd actually been. I see, I said quietly. That's when I opened the wooden box. Before I tell you what was in that box, and how it completely shattered Daniel's understanding of his childhood, let me know you're still invested. Comment, still here, or drop 100 points below so I know you're following along. What comes next is where 25 years of hidden sacrifice met one moment of painful truth. And just a heads up, the following events incorporate some dramatic storytelling elements for educational purposes. If that's not your style, feel free to click away now. But if you want to see how love looks when it's been carefully documented for a quarter century, let's keep going. The first thing I pulled out of the wooden box was a composition notebook, worn soft from years of handling. The cover was labeled Daniel Year 1 in my careful handwriting. What is this? Daniel asked, his anger fading into confusion. This, I said, opening to the first page, is a record of your first year of life after your mother left. I wrote down everything. Every shift I worked, every dollar I spent, every choice I made. I wanted to remember, even if you were too young to understand. I read aloud from the first entry, March 15th, Daniel's 18th month birthday. Worked double shift at plant, then midnight shift at warehouse. 16 hours total. Earned $128. Spent $47 on diapers and formula. Daniel said dada 3 times today. Mrs. Rodriguez said he asked for me while I was at work. I wish I could be here more, but the rent is due and he needs food. Someday I'll explain why Daddy has to work so much. Daniel's face had gone pale. I flipped through the pages, reading excerpts from 25 years of documentation. April 3rd, Daniel's daycare called. He has an ear infection. Left work early, lost 4 hours of pay. Took him to clinic. $85 for doctor visit and antibiotics. He cried for me to hold him all night. These are the moments that matter more than any overtime shift. I pulled out the second notebook. Year 2. June 12th, Daniel's first Little League game. Worked overnight shift Friday, then went straight to his game Saturday morning. Fell asleep in the bleachers during the 3rd inning. He hit a double. When I woke up, he was tugging on my sleeve asking if I saw it. I lied and said yes. I'll never forgive myself for missing that moment. Daniel was staring at the notebooks spread across the table. There were 25 of them, one for each year of his life. Dad, I don't understand. Why did you write all this down? Because I wanted to remember what love looked like, I said simply, even when I was too exhausted to show it the way I wanted to. I opened another notebook, this one from his high school years. October 23rd, Daniel's homecoming game. He's starting quarterback now. Picked up an extra shift to pay for his letter jacket, then drove straight to the school. Arrived during halftime. He threw 2 touchdown passes in the second half. After the game, he hugged me and said he was proud I came. He has no idea I've missed only 3 of his games in 4 years, and all 3 were because I was working to pay for his equipment. I pulled out a folder filled with receipts, bank statements, and pay stubs. This is every extra shift I worked to pay for your baseball gear. This is the documentation from when I sold my car to buy your first computer. This is the loan I took against my pension to pay for your SAT prep courses. Daniel was looking through the papers with growing horror, not because the sacrifices were shocking, but because he was realizing how completely he'd misunderstood their relationship. Dad, I never asked you to do any of this. No, you didn't ask. That's what made it love instead of obligation. I pulled out another folder, this one filled with letters I'd written but never sent. These are letters I wrote to you when you were sleeping and I was getting ready for work. Letters I wrote when I missed your school plays because I was working double shifts. Letters I wrote when I wanted to explain why I couldn't always be there the way other fathers could. I opened one at random and began reading, Dear Danny, you're 12 years old today. I missed your birthday party because I was working overtime to pay for your Washington, D.C. trip. When I got home at midnight, you'd saved me a piece of cake. You said you understood that I had to work, that you weren't mad. But I could see the disappointment in your eyes. I want you to know that missing your party was the hardest thing I've ever done. I want you to know that I would rather have been nowhere else in the world than celebrating with you. Someday, when you're older, maybe you'll understand that love sometimes looks like absence when it's actually presence in a different form. Daniel was crying now, quiet tears streaming down his face as he looked at 25 years of documented love he'd never known existed. There's more, I said softly. I pulled out a thick envelope filled with photographs. Pictures I'd taken of him at every game, every school play, every graduation ceremony, even when I could only stay for part of the event before having to leave for work. I never missed the important moments, Danny. I might have been tired, I might have been distracted by work stress, but I never missed what mattered. I just never told you how much I'd given up to be there. I opened the final notebook, the one from the past year. December 18th, Daniel called to cancel Christmas dinner. Says he's spending it with Jennifer's family instead. I understand, he's building his own life now. But I'd already requested the day off from work and bought him the watch he mentioned wanting. I'll save it for his birthday instead. I miss my son, but I'm proud of the man he's becoming, even if that man doesn't seem to need his father anymore. January 15th, Daniel called to lecture me about going back to school, improving my prospects. He means well, but he doesn't understand that I already achieved everything I wanted. I raised a son who's smarter, more successful, and more accomplished than I ever dreamed of being. That was always the goal. I closed the notebook and looked at Daniel, who was staring at the table covered with 25 years of evidence that he'd completely misunderstood his childhood. You asked if I was a real father, I said quietly. The answer is in those notebooks, those receipts, Those letters I never sent because I didn't want you to feel guilty about the choices I made gladly. Daniel was sobbing now, the kind of deep, body-shaking tears that come when someone realizes they've been fundamentally wrong about something important. Dad, I didn't know. I never knew any of this. That was intentional, Danny. I didn't want you to grow up feeling like a burden. I wanted you to focus on building your future, not worrying about what I was sacrificing to make it possible. But I thought you didn't care about being involved. I thought work was more important to you than I was. Work was never more important than you. Work was how I showed you that you were the most important thing in my life. Every overtime shift, every double shift, every weekend I spent working instead of resting, that wasn't absence, Danny. That was presence. That was love in the form of action instead of words. Daniel looked up at me, his successful, confident facade completely stripped away. Dad, I'm so sorry. I've been horrible to you. I've been ashamed of you, embarrassed by your work, treating you like you were somehow less than the people I wanted to impress. I know. How can you forgive me? How can you even look at me after what I said tonight? I reached across the table and put my hand over his, the way I'd done when he was small and frightened by bad dreams. Because you're my son, Danny. Because I didn't sacrifice everything to build your future just so I could withdraw my love when you made mistakes. Because even when you were breaking my heart, I was still proud of the man you'd become. We sat there for a long time, surrounded by the evidence of 25 years of love that Daniel was finally able to see. Dad, he said finally, I want Jennifer to meet you, but not because I'm managing the situation or preparing you to be acceptable to her family. I want her to meet you because you're the most impressive man I know, and I'm ashamed that I've been too stupid to see it. I'd like to meet her too, son. And Dad, I want you to keep those notebooks. I want my children to know what kind of grandfather they have. I want them to understand that dignity comes from love and sacrifice, not from job titles or social status. I'd like that too, Danny. 3 months later, I had dinner with Daniel and Jennifer. She was exactly as intelligent and accomplished as he described, but she was also kind, curious, and genuinely interested in hearing about my work at the plant. She asked thoughtful questions about industrial processes, worker safety, and the technical skills required for steel manufacturing. You know, she said during dessert, my father always says that the people who actually build things are the most impressive people in any society. Everything else is just commentary. Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. A year later, they were married. Daniel asked me to officiate the wedding. He wanted his father, not a stranger, to speak about the meaning of commitment and love. In my speech, I talked about how real love shows up even when it's inconvenient, even when it requires sacrifice, even when it looks like absence but is actually the deepest form of presence. They have a daughter now, Emma, who's 2 years old. Daniel brings her to visit every Sunday. She knows that Grandpa works at a factory and that Grandpa's work is important because it helps build things that make the world stronger. Daniel has learned to see his childhood differently now, not as a series of abandonment, but as a series of gifts given by a father who loved him enough to work multiple jobs, miss his own rest, and sacrifice his own opportunities to ensure his son had every advantage. But more importantly, Daniel has learned something about the nature of respect. He's learned that a person's worth isn't measured by their education level or social status, but by their character, their dedication, and the love they show through their actions. He's learned that the most valuable things in life are often given by people who don't have much to give, and that sacrifice is only visible to those who care enough to look for it. If there's one thing this experience taught me about fatherhood and family, it's this: document your love. Write down the sacrifices. Take pictures of the moments. Keep records of the choices you make for your children's benefit. Not because you plan to use them as evidence someday, but because children often can't see love while it's happening. They only see the surface, the absence, the exhaustion, the focus on work and bills and practical matters. But someday they might be ready to understand that love isn't just presence. Sometimes love is absence that enables presence later. Sometimes love is exhaustion that creates opportunities. Sometimes love is sacrifice that looks selfish until you understand what was being sacrificed and why. To every parent who's working multiple jobs to provide opportunities for their children, your children may not see your sacrifice now, but that doesn't make it worthless. Keep records. Document your choices. Write down the reasons behind the long hours and the missed moments. Someday, when they're old enough to understand what love looks like in action rather than just in words, they'll be grateful to know the full story of how much you gave and why you gave it gladly. And to every adult child who's ever judged a parent for being absent without understanding what that absence made possible, ask questions. Look deeper. Try to understand the full context of the choices that shaped your childhood. Sometimes the parent you thought didn't care enough actually cared so much that they were willing to sacrifice their own comfort, their own rest, and their own dreams to ensure you had opportunities they never had. These family stories aren't easy to tell. It requires admitting that love sometimes hurts, that good intentions can be misunderstood, and that the people we love most can sometimes hurt us the deepest. But I believe they need to be told because there are millions of parents out there working multiple jobs, sacrificing their own comfort, and wondering if their children will ever understand that every choice was made out of love. If this story reached something in you, if you've ever misjudged someone's sacrifice or had your own sacrifice go unrecognized, I want you to know, love creates its own documentation. The truth always emerges, even if it takes 25 years. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If it helped you understand something about sacrifice, recognition, or the complex ways we show love, please share it. Subscribe to Family Reckoning so you never miss another story about the complicated, beautiful ways families learn to see each other clearly. And remember, sometimes the most profound love is invisible until someone cares enough to write it down. Note, this story contains dramatic elements created for educational and entertainment purposes. While based on real patterns of parental sacrifice and family misunderstanding, specific details have been crafted to illustrate important principles about love and recognition. Always seek professional guidance for serious family relationship issues.